Let me just hit record. We are so excited to have you here. We have an incredible group of panelists. As you join, if you could please keep yourself on mute and change your Zoom name to reflect your name, your title, and your organization, that would be great. I'm going to give a quick overview of the project. We're going to introduce our panelists and we're going to get started. And so again, so great to have all of you here. I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. All right. So today we will be talking about composting infrastructure. And so infrastructure are all of the critical pieces and parts that allow any compostables or compostable items to go from the end user to a composting facility. And so we're going to be talking and hearing from a wide variety of voices and folks talking about all of the different pieces and parts that are related to creating composting infrastructure and talking about some of the lessons learned in getting that started. So this project is a 2-year project. We are doing a whole system strategic planning to improve the circularity of compostables and compost. And ultimately, we are looking to build towards a future where there's cohesive and seamless collaboration across all of the different organizations that are part of the U.S. composting system. And so all of these discovery workshops, and there's 12 in total, start with the piles and work backwards all the way to policy. And so we are doing a series of discovery workshops as a way to do discovery. This is strategic planning. And so we are looking to hear from all of the different stakeholders in the system. Each discovery workshop focuses on a different place where somebody sits in the system. And the idea is to work together to create a shared understanding so that we can create a shared vision and a common purpose with clear action plans and based on the work that everybody is willing to do together. These discovery workshops lead to a 3-day intensive strategic planning event in Denver in September. And then afterwards, we will be sharing out the strategic plan that is developed with that microcosm of the system. This project is being guided by an incredible group of committed steering committee members. We have folks all across the system that come together every other week to work on designing the strategic planning event. We also have been incredibly lucky to have a number of different circularity partners. These amazing organizations have helped us launch in last fall and get this project off the ground. Deeply appreciative. Wanted to call out my co-host today. So Linda Norris-Walt, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Composting Council. Her and I are going to be co-facilitating today. U.S. Composting Council has been an incredible partner and excited to have her here as my co-host. And so what is this project? So this project is a 2-year initiative. It's a whole system strategic planning effort. We're looking to engage pioneers from all across the system, so all of you to come together and create this shared vision and collective roadmap toward optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. And this work is centered, but is not limited to food contact compostables, and the strategic planning is being guided by the Future Search model. And so when you hear us talk about circularity, what we are talking about is our intentions. So for the U.S. composting system, that means the intentions of compostability are realized for the compostable packaging and organic materials, and that the end products produced are able to be put back into meaningful use. And so the work with our steering committee has kind of guided what the intentions are for this project. And so number one, designing an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes environmental benefits, improving collaboration and coordination across the system, improving information flow between brands, packaging design, point of material sorting, and commercial composting processes for increased value chain effectiveness, and directing more food waste to commercial composting facilities that creates value and confidence for all stakeholders. And last but not least, shifting stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination and the cost of contamination. So this initiative has 3 parts. We start with the whole system. So everybody and anybody can join these workshops. These workshops are publicly available on our YouTube channel. We are looking to highlight kind of what are the challenges and opportunities faced by all the different stakeholders in the system. And so this discovery process started in February and it goes through September. In September, we are narrowing to a group of 200 that we're working with to create a microcosm of the system and do a 3-day future search strategic planning event. And then we are widening back out to the whole industry with a facilitated strategic plan activation. So this discovery workshop series, as I mentioned, starts in the piles and moves backwards all the way back to policy. And so far we've heard from compost manufacturers, haulers and recycling companies, large generators and large food service companies, packaging distributors and broadliners, and here we are today, composting infrastructure. And so up next, we're going to do a 2-part series. The first one is materials suppliers and materials designers. So we have a full schedule all the way through September. The final discovery workshop will be September 12th and end with elected officials and policymakers. All of these are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And today we will be hearing from these wonderful panelists. And so we have our composting infrastructure, lots of different voices from across the system, everything from government and regulation to folks looking at kind of what is the process beginning to end, from the imagination of building composting infrastructure all the way to creating it and then managing. So managing the facilities themselves, and then talking about those folks who design and create the facilities that are used to manifest composting manufacturing. And so we're going to hear from Bob Barrows from Oregon DEQ, Holly Stirknob from Oregon Metro, Carolyn Berry from Closed Loop Partners, Nick Olheister from Ecology. Phil, unfortunately, is unable to join us, but is here in spirit. Susan Toman from the Toman Group will be speaking for John Brigham from Cedar Grove. Orion Black Brown is here from Green Mountain Technologies, and Brett Hoyt is here from Sustainable Generation. We have 4 different questions. If you've joined us before, if you've watched any of our videos, you're going to recognize the thread that we pull through all of these different sessions. One is just to orient us to the individual and their organization and how they fit into the system. The second is looking at opportunities. The third question is about challenges. And the fourth question is an ask of other stakeholders. And so we are going to ask one question at a time. We're going to put them in the chat so you can see those too. And then we're going to call on each panelist, and they're going to have each have a couple minutes to respond to each. As we go, if you have questions, we'd love to see those. Please put them in the chat. We're going to gather those and put together a Q&A document after the fact. And if you are able to join us next time around, we are coming together on the 13th. These are on Thursdays every 2 to 3 weeks, and from 12 to 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. And so stop sharing for a moment. All right. And as you're joining, if you could change your name on Zoom to include your name, title, and organization, that's great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And going to get our first question in the chat, and then we are going to start. So glad to see all of you and have all of you here. All right, so our first question is, as part of introducing yourself and your organization, describe all the ways that you intersect with composting infrastructure. And we're going to start with Bob.
Oh, hi, thanks, Candy. So my name is Bob Barrows. I'm a waste policy analyst in the materials management program with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, a little bit south of Washington. I'm the, among other tasks, I'm the composting program lead for the state, and I'm a member of DEQ's newly formed statewide organics strategy group focused on increasing recovery of food waste and other organics. As the composting program lead, I've worked with our composters statewide since we started a composting permitting program in the late 90s. So DEQ intersects with composting infrastructure in a lot of different ways. One of them is through land use and zoning. Through our permitting program, we require that a composting facility be located on a piece of property zoned correctly. So we work with local governments and the prospective composter to get that. We work with local solid waste management agencies, counties and cities in helping with their planning of organics programs, organics collection programs. We work with haulers and transfer stations, primarily providing technical assistance, but we also regulate some transfer facilities. We work with composting facilities in that we permit them, but we also, and so we're regulating the environmental aspects of that, how that facility affects the landscape around it. But we also help them troubleshoot issues such as clopyralid contamination that's occurred off and on over the years, or if they need to upgrade a site for odor management or better water control, we help them work through technology upgrades for either of those. And then finally, we haven't, but we're starting to do policy development around organics. We've been slow on the uptake with a statewide policy. So we're working on that now. We're working on a statewide organic strategy, and likely as we start crystallizing that strategy, we're hoping to get more material out of the waste stream recovered, and so that will affect infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for being here. All right, Holly. And you are on mute.
There, thank you. Good morning. My name is Holly Sternkorb. I'm a principal planner with Metro, the regional government in the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area. First of all, what is Metro? What is a regional government? Metro is a directly elected regional government, and we oversee issues of regional concern in the Portland metropolitan area. The issues we oversee include things that affect all of the cities and counties in the region: transportation planning, land use planning, and solid waste planning. The region is comprised of 3 counties, the city of Portland, and 23 other cities with a population of 1.6 million. To put this in perspective, nearly 40% of the population of the state of Oregon lives in the metro region. Metro on the solid waste side, we're responsible for planning, management, and oversight of the regional solid waste system. Metro intersects with composting infrastructure through regional policy. Also, transfer station operations. We own and operate 2 public transfer stations, and we regulate disposal in the region. Our local government partners oversee the collection side. So we partner on the disposal and collection issues. We also intersect with composting through contracting. We contract for processing, we contract for transportation, and compliance authority. We align with DEQ with some compliance functions in that we operate a series of, we've got authorizations for transfer facilities and processors that are processing the waste that's disposed of in the metro region. Overall, we're making sure that any waste that's disposed of in the metro region is handled in an environmentally sound manner.
That's so great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and Carolyn is going to join a little bit later, so we're going to go to Nick.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, everyone. My name is Nick Olheiser. I'm with Recology Organics up here in Oregon. I'm currently the operations manager for our 3 compost facilities that we have up here. I've been with the company in the composting sector for going on 16 years in June. Here in Oregon, we currently manage 155,000 tons per year between the 3 facilities. Soon to be 180,000 tons per year after we finish up some construction efforts at one of our facilities that we just kicked off the other day, actually. Between the 3 facilities that we have up here in Oregon, 2 of them are managed through an air-to-static pile system. One of them is an open windrow system. Over the last 15 years, Recology has been in Oregon. We've worked with companies such as Green Mountain Technologies, which we'll hear from Jeff Gage today, and other consultant groups to develop state-of-the-art systems to not only help us increase capacity within the region, but also reduce odors and also reduce odors and help us produce the highest quality products that we can for our customers. Within the last 4 years alone, actually, we've worked on projects to bring in an additional 50,000 tons per year just between 2 of our sites up here in Oregon. So growing very rapidly. The feedstocks that are becoming available in the region are growing very rapidly as well, so they're really going hand in hand. Some of the work that we've done at the facilities most recently have included increasing airflow via larger scale blowers. We've installed subgrade piping on our air pads to reduce operational time needed to move materials throughout the facility. We've installed wireless temperature probe systems for the ease and use of collection, introduced remote access to our systems that allows us to manage and track airflow and data from realistically anywhere in the world, as well as help create standardized SOPs to help flow through the facilities and mainstream our operations to make sure we're doing the best that we can on a day-to-day basis. And again, being cognizant that we do have close residents nearby, reducing odors. And the most important thing is creating a high quality product for our customers. So thank you for having me here today.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Toman, and I'm representing myself as part of my consultancy Toman Group today. I do work to write RFPs for organics processing systems. So I am covering John, but my intersection with composting is spent 30 years in solid waste, hazardous waste byproducts management, and then 12 years at Cedar Grove composting in a variety of roles. So I'm too anxious to hear from everybody else. So that's what I have for that. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody today.
That's great. And Susan, can you introduce John just quickly?
John Brigham.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Brigham. I'm sorry. He's the Senior Vice President at Cedar Grove Composting. He was going to be here today, but he couldn't make it. So he gave me some.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. All right, Orion.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Orion, Director of Operations at Green Mountain Technologies. And Green Mountain Technologies, or GMT, we've been designing compost facilities and equipment for those facilities since 1992. Through this, we've developed a wide range of solutions from large-scale ASP facilities, like some of the ones that Nick operates, to smaller scale in-vessel technology, ones that might be at a school or university, kind of that scale. We have over 400 facilities around the world, and by developing these facilities, we've overlapped with most sections of composting infrastructure. And when I kind of talk about composting infrastructure, I'm talking about the facility side of it mostly, the actual compost facility. So we've done conceptual design, value engineering, permitting, odor control, construction, actually designing and providing the equipment that allows the composting to take place there. And then after construction's completed, operator training, looking at contamination removal and compliance. Also recently, we've been doing some work on bioplastics and human body composting as well. And my focus at GMT is on project management, facility design, and helping prospective customers make informed decisions about what composting infrastructure would work best at their location.
That's great. Thank you so much. Welcome. And Brett.
Oh, thanks, Candy. Brett Hoyt with Sustainable Generation. I do business development for our company. We're in the compost manufacturing business. About 80% of our business is working with windrow composters and converting those operations over to CAS, covered aerated static piles. And when folks start taking food waste for the first time, they run into issues they weren't expecting, and not always the case, but in most cases it could be odors, vectors, birds they didn't expect. And then when you're taking post-consumer food waste, you're going to have some contamination in there, and you don't want litter blowing around your site. So we're converting a lot of windrow operations nationally to CAS systems. The other 20% of our business is really diverse. We're seeing composting operations being set up all over the country, where they're mostly on both coasts or where there are mandates. But we're seeing a real diversification in where the projects are located. We're still doing a few large projects over 100,000 tons a year this year, but most of the folks we're talking to are on that 1,000 to 3,000 tons a week or less, and they're just getting started. And when we're approached, we have to know everything. There is no, we need to understand the front end, that the hauler has to deal with, the private equity people, the investors, the entrepreneur. We have to understand the back end too. And then these engineering firms, most of them have never built a composting facility before either. So we're working with them to develop a plan to move forward as well. So it's all encompassing in our end of the business. There's no, we're touching every piece of it. And we're excited to be here today. Thank you.
That's so great. Thank you and welcome. And then Linda, if you want to speak a little bit for Phil Westcott, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. Yes, I had invited Phil to come to this call to represent the smaller composter. I live in Frederick County, just 10 minutes from Phil and about 15 minutes from his tier 2 small facility where he takes food scrap, compostable packaging, manures. He's permitted for 20,000 tons per year at this point. And that's a little bit about Phil.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we are going to shift to question 2. And so Linda, if you want to take that.
Absolutely. So, yes, one of my favorite topics. This is a bit of a long question, and it will be in the chat. From where you sit, what do you believe are the essential components and the steps required to build new composting infrastructure or to increase capacity in current systems in order to support getting compostable materials, organics from end users to composting manufacturers? And what do you believe are the greatest opportunities to improve composting infrastructure? And Bob, from your position, what would you think about that question?
Thanks, Linda. Well, in Oregon, most of our population has some form of composting opportunity. Most of the cities have a composter serving them. The smaller towns may not. A lot of our composters take food waste. There's a fair amount that don't also. So getting more food waste out of the waste stream is probably the biggest an opportunity. We did a quick calculation. We're only recovering about 10% of the food waste generated in the state as of a couple of years ago. So I'm going to break my answer up into 2 different perspectives. One is since we already have current composting capacity, I'm going to talk about increasing that capacity, and then I'll talk about building new infrastructure. So one of the things we think increasing current capacity would help is providing clean, uncontaminated loads of food waste to our composters generated at the generator. So sending only compostable material. Of course, education of the public into businesses is huge, but what we're thinking is probably one of the more important ways is to provide technical assistance to businesses like grocery stores and restaurants and food service industries to help them set up a collection system and teach and train their employees and continue to teach and train them because they rotate staff a fair amount to only put what is allowed into those bins to be sent. This is on a commercial level to be sent to a composter. So that's one thing. Another thing, a way to increase capacity in Oregon is to keep our options open regarding the end processing facility for the feedstock, the organic feedstocks coming out. We have aerobic composters and anaerobic digesters. So what we're thinking is to initiate more processing of collected food waste, grind it up, screen out any plastics that are in there, and any other contaminants, so that then you have a feedstock that can go to either an anaerobic digester or an aerobic composter. Like I mentioned, we have aerobic composters that really don't want food waste because of the contamination. We're hoping that by pre-processing, they'll be more likely to take food waste and accept it for composting. the pre-processing facilities could either be at a transfer station or at the facility itself. And then the last thing that came to mind for increasing current capacity is to talk to our publicly operated wastewater treatment plants that have anaerobic digesters. That's infrastructure that's already there. We already have one facility in the state that is has geared up to take food waste. So we would like to talk to more of our around the state wastewater treatment plants to see who else is interested in food waste, talk to them about the benefits of it. We do know there's several other ones that are interested. With a wastewater treatment plant, there's a big budgeting process. It takes many years. So starting the conversation now for years down the road is really important. So that's for increasing the current capacity. Building new infrastructure is another topic. As I mentioned, we've got composting capacity around the state. At this point, it's really unclear how much additional infrastructure we need since we're just starting our strategic planning process. Most likely the Portland metro area is going to need more infrastructure, but we don't know that yet. But in order to assist new facility construction, assuming we are going to build one thing we could do is zoning is always a problem, an issue. So the state DEQ can help a prospective composter find an appropriately zoned location, work with local governments to help them find that location, and then also help with working through permitting processes. Sometimes local zoning takes a conditional use permit. DEQ can help with that, and then also working through our permitting process. That's one thing. Zoning, financing assistance, providing grants or low interest loans from DEQ is not available yet, but Oregon's DEQ's applied for our Oregon's Priority Climate Action Plan submitted to EPA this spring. We're hoping to get funding. If we get that funding, we've got some targeting. Financing is one of those things, providing grants. And then, as I mentioned, the other thing for increasing new capacity is to talk to our wastewater treatment plants, see if they're interested. If there are some interested, that's already built infrastructure and we're off and running with that. So that's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Holly, and I know it was mentioned, what is the Oregon metro area thinking about in terms of the needs?
It's great to follow Bob. We work closely with the state of Oregon, DEQ, as well as our local government partners and cities and counties and our composters and processors. We've been working on food waste reduction, prevention, donation, and composting for over 20 years with varying degrees of success. And we have had a commercial food waste program and then residential food waste programs in the region for 15 years. So we've worked through learned a lot of lessons. Some things work, some things haven't. But overall, we have made significant progress in recovering commercial food scraps from landfill and turning them into usable compost and renewable energy. It's great, to be on this panel also not only with Bob, but also Ecology, which is one of our major partners in composting. And I saw Dirt Hugger in the audience too, which is another one of our composters that is composting and taking our food waste. Our ultimate goals, and we share these goals with our industry partners and our jurisdictional partners, first of all, is to reduce the impact of climate change through reducing food waste. And the second, and this really ties into our conversation today, is to support a sustainable system that creates marketable plastic-free material from the food waste that we can't prevent. As I said, we've been working on food waste for 20 years. The big shift in our program in the metro region on the commercial side came in 2016 when our council directed staff to move forward with the development of region-wide policies and programs that would ensure the region had a sustainable system for food recovery, and a sustainable system that really had three elements. First one being to capture enough high-quality material to make processing facilities economically viable. The second was to have an adequate system for collection and moving the material through the system, transfer capacity. And the third was to have enough stable processing capacity to allow growth over time. So we really have been working on having an integrated system, thinking from the end market all the way up through to collection and the generator. So to achieve this integrated regional system, we focused on 3 areas. The first one is mandatory collection, our transfer capacity, and then processing capacity. For mandatory collection, after many years, we had a voluntary food waste program that started, it was I think 2010, so about 15 years ago. We adopted, so after many years of the voluntary program and really not getting enough material to create that processing capacity that we needed, we switched to a mandatory program, and that program went into effect March 2022. So it requires all food generating businesses to separate food scraps based on the amount that they generate. We've got a robust technical assistance and outreach program to help get those generators set up with a successful program. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is to push the clean material out of the waste stream. Then the second piece is the transfer capacity. So Metro, as I said, on the compliance authority that we have in contracting, we're responsible for assuring waste and recyclables in the region are managed in an appropriate way and at appropriately authorized facilities through a system of licenses, franchises, and agreements. So on the transfer side, Metro owns and operates 2 public transfer stations, and then we authorize a system of private transfer stations. So in this area, we've been working towards increasing the availability of transfer capacity to serve the 3-county region to efficiently move the material once we push it out of the waste stream. And then the third piece is the processing capacity. And this is really important to our program. Not only do we authorize facilities, we also authorize the facilities to transfer the material, but we also authorize facilities that process the food waste generated in the region. And the stability and the resilience of our system rely on the strength and the redundancy of processing and end markets. We've learned, again, through our 15 years, that the quality of our food waste is really important in maintaining and expanding processing capacity. As a result, we've made policy decisions and are moving towards operational changes to ensure that we have a clean feedstock that's suitable for both composting and anaerobic digestion, because in the region, for the last 10 years, 15, many years, composting, but then we have also had anaerobic digestion in our system. Originally, lessons learned, we allowed compostables and cardboard in our voluntary business food waste program. But as the volumes of those non-food items grew, it affected our Metro's ability to provide the energy producers, the AD folks and composters with quality food scraps and the quality food scraps that they require to make their products. And in fact, the amount of non-food items reached such a level that it put Metro at risk of not having any food scraps processors interested in taking our material. So as a result of that, and this I think was in 2015, we made the decision to go food only. And we did that to support our local composters who also don't want contamination and including compostable serviceware or other contaminants. And this also allowed us access to anaerobic digestion along with composting, again, expanding the redundancy of our markets, and those multiple markets add to the resiliency of our system. So just in general, to support our food only system, we coordinate with local governments, DQ, businesses, our processors, but mainly like our businesses, to reduce contamination at every stage of food scraps recovery. We're working towards the inclusion of depackaging capacity to remove contaminants from food waste loads that come through our transfer stations. We fund, as I said, local government technical assistance programs to support business food waste prevention, edible donation, and food composting. And then we also have a series of grants. So we have made investments in food scraps reduction and environmentally sound processing efforts by supporting nonprofits and businesses. And then we also lead or participate in outreach and education campaigns aimed at reducing food waste, not only in the commercial sector, but at homes as well.
Thanks, Holly. So Nick, what is the view from composters at Recology?
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in the last 4 years, we completed 2 projects that brought on an additional 50,000 tons per year. So throughout those 2 projects, and frankly, going forward into the third one that we're in the middle of right now, we have a lot of lessons learned, and we ran into a lot of challenges, which gave us a lot of insight into what could be beneficial for composters, others in the industry, to build new composting infrastructure and increase capacity in current ones. There's a lot of challenges that you run into. Bob touched on some of those from a permitting aspect. It's very hard to source a new facility within Oregon. A lot of that has to do with the zoning laws within that. One of the things that we found at a existing composting facility that was just initially beneficial was collaboration. Collaboration with all the parties that are involved in the process, from siting a composting facility to those that are regulating us. More importantly, working closely and communicating with those that are affected by composting facilities as well, such as local communities, those that are participating in food waste and yard debate programs, educating on them on what can and can't be accepted at these composting sites. I can't tell you how many tours we've done over the last few years and brought people in and showed them the effects of contamination, which I'll talk about in the next question a little bit more in depth, the issues around that. But collaboration has been huge on us and successfully completing the last 2 expansion projects that we did at the sites as well. One of the other challenges that no one's immune to, doesn't matter the size of a composting facility or a company, is cost. These are very capital intensive facilities, from the infrastructure needed to produce the compost to the equipment needed to move the compost throughout the facilities. One of the things that was hugely beneficial for us, especially because we kicked off a project right in the middle of COVID, when costs were soaring through the roof, funding assistance, grant programs from local government programs. They've been proven to be a huge success for us. Metro had a series of grants that went out during the 2020-2021 year, I believe, that we capitalized on for 2 of our projects up here in the Oregon region, which was hugely beneficial for us. Again, it doesn't matter the size of composting facility you are, you're not immune to those costs that are incurred when we're trying to do that. So I'll keep mine a little bit shorter. I know we're running short here, but those have been the 2 biggest things that we've seen been beneficial for us. Again, collaboration and funding assistance, because costs are expensive for facilities like this.
For sure. So we're welcoming with us now Caroline Berry from Closed Loop Partners. Caroline, go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself. And I think you've seen the questions. So
yeah. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. And apologies for joining late. I'm gonna get kind of caught up to speed here, but bear with me if I'm being a little redundant based on what's been said over the last couple of minutes. But I'm Caroline Berry. I'm the program manager of Closed Loop Partners Composting Consortium. Closed Loop Partners is an investment firm. We're focused on building the circular economy. And the Composting Consortium specifically is who I'm here on behalf of today. And we're an initiative of the innovation arm of Closed Loop Partners, if you will. So our consortium is really a collaboration across the entire composting value chain and compostable packaging value chains. So that includes brands, manufacturers, composters, industry groups, and NGOs, among others. And just to explain how we intersect with infrastructure specifically, we entered the space back in 2021, wanting to really support composters and gain a better understanding of the dynamics of the industry. And after 2.5 years of research and in-market testing on topics like labeling, contamination, the disintegration of compostable products, it's really enabled us to establish this data-driven understanding of the industry's most pressing challenges and needs and opportunities. And one gap that we've identified is that there's this immense opportunity and necessity, quite frankly, to scale food waste composting infrastructure in the United States. And we really want to see composting succeed as a solution to organic circularity. especially as an option for complex post-consumer organic streams. But we believe that the industry requires some significant investment and support to get to that future state, along with some appropriate incentives to change existing composting operations. So to address that second question, maybe I'll just start by saying, today's US composting infrastructure is designed primarily to process yard trimmings, and that's due to a policy trend in the late 80s and 90s that banned yard waste from landfill across dozens of states. Composting facilities are now beginning to modernize and diversify their feedstocks, transitioning to accept food waste and, in some cases, compostable packaging to really meet the challenges of climate change and to address many zero waste goals that are being established by cities, by counties, and by states across the country. So the industry is really only at the beginning, I'd say, of that transition. And we know that only 4% of the food that is wasted in America today, or generated by Americans, I should say, makes its way to composting facilities. So really, there are several realities that have to be met to improve composting infrastructure overall, to increase capacity, and to divert organics and compostable materials away from landfill. So I'll just highlight a couple that come to mind. I'd say first, making it easier to set up and build food waste composting facilities and to retrofit yard waste facilities to accept these more complex feedstocks is paramount. It sounds like Bob may have touched upon this earlier, but permitting requirements can be significantly cost prohibitive and time intensive for composters to navigate. And regulations vary significantly across state and municipality lines, causing even more confusion. So I think standardizing the permitting process can create a more predictable operating environment for investors as well as regulators and composters. The second thing I'd highlight around opportunities is really this growing awareness around the environmental impact of organic waste. And that is fueling a lot of policy changes across the US. So policies like landfill bans, for example, and material recovery policies. Two topical areas that we see as most critical to infrastructure expansion are EPR and policies that expand the procurement and application of compost across the country. So federal and state funding, whether it's in the form of grants, legislation, other programs, can really help direct some much needed investment towards composting infrastructure. Third piece I want to highlight is fragmented organics collection programs. The reality is that most Americans lack convenient options for composting their food scraps and compostable packaging. There are 15 million households in America with access to collections programs, according to Biocycle data. And what's promising is that that number has been increasing steadily over the last couple of years, but it's mainly consolidated in just a handful of states. Perhaps unsurprisingly, California leads the nation thanks to SB 1383 legislation. And California is followed by Illinois, New York, Minnesota, and then Connecticut, I believe, is the fifth. So really together, those 5 states make up almost 70% of collections access programs in the United States. So we have to address these hurdles that are preventing the widespread scale and adoption of collection programs. Things like infrastructure costs, right? So costs of vehicles, bins, public education, among others. And then the last thing I'll say, and I promise I'll stop talking and I'm trying to be zippy, is that the industry, the composting industry, really needs flexible financing mechanisms to support infrastructure expansion. The Composting Consortium's point of view is that there are 3 predominant methods of financing that are best equipped to support composting infrastructure. And those include grants and philanthropic funding, catalytic capital, so meaning patient flexible financing from foundations, from impact investors, or from government agencies, and third, private equity. So we're actually about to release an investment report, which speaks to that in much more detail. So I will stop there, but I hope that's helpful insight. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm glad that you're here now. Susan, can you take us next to your viewpoint?
Yeah, just to sort of lean into areas that maybe haven't been addressed yet, and also to Nick's comments and Caroline's. I thought it was good to know, I have a lot of folks that say, how come we don't have more facilities? well, why aren't there more options? And Bob alluded to the fact that it's often a long process to site a facility. So I just really briefly, and this could be covered in more detail with some of the other speakers, just wanted everyone to get a sense for all the steps involved in siting of facilities that investors have to consider. And that's why I have a huge respect for compost manufacturers for all the investment they made many years ago in some cases. But, you know, they have to buy land. Composting takes a lot of land. So as land prices go up, you know, can you afford to buy the land? There are some programs where they've leased the land, but then if you lease the land, you know, that can be problematic down the road. What are your proximities to your feedstocks? Do you site it 200 miles away, or do you put it in the community where you're not going to have the emissions of shipping it way out into the boonies? You have public meetings that, you know, Nick and mentioned, you know, you have to have a community plan. You know, if you're going to site a facility, there's going to be public meetings. So you're going to need to have some connection with the community to make sure they know what's going on so they get all the facts. Permitting, there's many permits that you have to get in some states depending on how regulated you are. So there's permitting process. Do you have to develop the land before you can even site the facility on it? Will it take fill? Will you be, you know, making a productive wetlands out of something that was not productive before? So you have a lot of land development considerations. What's the best available control technology? Does your state require that? Solid waste permits, in some states now, air permits are required. And then if you're going to discharge water, do you need an NPDES permit, or how are you going to handle your leachate? Finally, the site development was mentioned. That's just before you buy the technology and the equipment and figure out the labor. You know, what is your odor control technology? Do you need a tipping building in your state? Is it an impermeable surface that you have to dump your food on? So all these things add up to, you know, tremendous costs in certain states and certain areas that composters have to consider and are choosing to invest in, not making widgets, but making compost. So I have nothing but respect for all the work they do to make sure we have these facilities and that they're compliant and have the appropriate permits. So I just thought it'd be helpful to understand all those elements and why it may take a long period of time to actually site, build, and operate a facility. So that's what I would add to the discussion.
Thank you, Susan. Orion, what will you add from your point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I think a lot of people have covered a lot of the ground that I would share. Like Susan just did a great job walking through kind of what it takes to build a compost facility. But I mean, obviously, if we want more infrastructure, we need source separation, hauling, and compost facilities. And those things have to happen in parallel. We can't have one without the other. And sometimes I see some of these new regulatory bills, like HB 1799 or SB 1383, push a little bit more heavily on one of those facets and exclude some of the others. And I think in particular from the infrastructure standpoint, being the compost facility standpoint, I oftentimes don't see enough money going in that direction. And if we want to have composting infrastructure for, you know, huge portion of California's waste stream, that's going to cost a lot of money. And one challenge that I see, we work internationally as well, and one challenge I really see in America is that the cost of construction is super high here compared to other places. Like the cost of hiring a general contractor to do concrete work, fill, all those things is really, really expensive, especially right now after COVID. It's just gone up, it's gone crazy. So those are some of the big kind of challenges we have, and the way that we can fix or get around those is by continuing to create financial and regulatory incentives for those three things to happen. And to zoom out to some other countries that have great composting infrastructure and great organics diversion, one of which is Austria. In Austria, they have a landfill ban, so nothing organic that's not inert can go into the landfill, and that includes any trash that's in your municipal solid waste. So any organic matter in MSW has to be composted before it can go to the landfill. And then they have $100 per ton tax on everything, 100 euro ton tax on everything that goes to the landfill on top of that. And that's been enough to improve the composting infrastructure dramatically. So Yeah, sometimes in America, we're just kind of operating in the Wild West where we have so many different states and every single state does it in a different way. So if there's some sort of federal regulation that came down, I think that would really, really prove the adoption of organics diversion pretty quickly.
Thanks, Orion. The Wild West, another term that we use a lot is compost deserts. And Brett, what can you tell us you're hearing from composters that they need to fill in these compost deserts?
They need a lot of help. And some of it comes from legislation. But I agree with Carol, and we're just at the beginning of this. We're just getting started. So I'm really seeing a decentralization of the whole process, where we're getting inquiries from the square states and middle of the country and those deserts where prior we just didn't have any inquiries. And as a whole, as an industry, we've done a good job of getting folks to realize that we can't keep landfilling the organics. They have to be dealt with in another manner. And there is a legion of entrepreneurs out there that want to take advantage of this and start an operation. So, when I talk to folks that want to get started, a lot of them have feedstocks but can't find a site. And this is where 3Ps, public-private partnerships, could scale the composting industry dramatically, I think, over time. And it's going to take, they need some help with money, but as when you push legislation, you also have to have a procurement process. When I speak to people that want to get into the business, they really don't and haven't thought out the end market for the product. And it's hard to start a business without an end market, right? And you're going to have trouble raising capital with that. So if the states at the local level could help with the procurement piece of that, that would be a real benefit to them. Also, our facilities are scaling. 1383, if you look at California, all our facilities are scaling. So if you make a high value product and you keep your business clean and you have a clean operation, you can scale, and it's endless. The city of San Diego right now is going from 45,000 tons to 200,000 tons, just to give you an idea of the effects of 1383. But more legislation like that will drive the business without a doubt. Thank you.
That's great. Well, and it's just so interesting to hear about all of the different pieces and parts that are required in order to set up the systems that support composting. And so we're going to get into kind of our third question now, which is about challenges. And so what have been some of the greatest challenges, either with funding, permitting, building, maintaining, or regulating the composting infrastructure? And then where do you see are the biggest gaps? And for this question, we're asking the panelists to keep to about 2 minutes. And so we're going to start with Bob.
Oh, you shortened up my time on me. Well, so Susan and Nick pointed out very astutely that funding is a big problem. These facilities are really expensive. And to date, that's a gap here in Oregon. DEQ, we haven't had ability to fund anything. For permitting challenges, so I'm going to talk about permitting and regulating challenges because that's what we do. Of course, zoning, we've all talked about zoning. DEQ can't issue a permit until we get a land use compatibility statement from the local government indicating that that piece of property is zoned to allow a composting facility. And so in Oregon, it's always tough to zone a compost facility. Unfortunately, industrial zone land is about the best, is pretty typical of where composters go, and that's always in an urban area. Agricultural land, it's very difficult to cite anything on ag land because of our zoning, especially a commercial composting operation. So composters are always up against neighbors. There's always neighbors. There's in our permitting process, there's a public notice process. And because our composters are always going to be built up against neighbors, there's always going to be interest. And so that's one of the challenges, is to, if a neighbor voices concerns during our public notice process, it's working with the neighbors to talk about the facility, getting facility to talk with the neighbors. We actually have a state law now that requires a pre-building, pre-construction meeting between the composting facility, what's proposed, and the neighbors, which originally I didn't think was a good idea, but it's actually turned out to be a good thing. And then we have regulating challenges, probably odor, and the public perception about odor is number one, and well, is one of them, and contamination is the other. Odor, we get odor complaints, and all the composters can tell you this. A lot of them probably are not valid, but if it's a valid odor complaint, it can be addressed through operational or technology upgrades. And so that's something you can work with, but the public perception about odor is a big challenge, and it usually takes, and somebody alluded to this, Nick, I think, did, but it takes working with the neighbors, the regulators, and the facility to work through the odor perception and build some level of trust. And then contamination also is a regulatory. Well, in Oregon, it's not so much, since we don't allow compostable products. But for a composter, for the sale of their compost, it is an issue. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. DEQ views our composters as partners in recovering organic material from the waste stream and putting it to a good use. And because composters are businesses, they need to sell premium, clean, quality compost for their bottom line to be successful. So the key is to get generators to send only compostable materials to the composter. Processing can help that, but it's not always successful if there's a lot of contamination and plastic in there. Any composter will tell you that there's always little bits of plastic. Even yard debris, we have a number of composters that only take yard debris, but even yard debris has plastic in it. And one of the challenges is that the cost to remove the contamination just increases facility costs. The cost to build the thing, and then in removing contamination, it increases cost in equipment, time, and labor. And that can be a challenge for the facility, but it's a challenge for DEQ too. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I appreciate just everything you're sharing. And I know that a session like this could go for a couple hours, and just appreciate everybody being so incredibly prepared and succinct. Holly.
As I explained, like, our role in the system is that collection, the transfer, providing funding to our composters, and then supplying a clean feedstock to our composters and AD operators is also a big part of our role in the system. And we faced a lot of challenges in the last 20 years in all those aspects, but right now our biggest challenge is contamination. We do have a food only program, and prior to starting our mandatory collection program, we completed a study in 2020. It was also prior to COVID, which that had some effects on all of our programs. So we did a waste characterization study of our food waste that was coming in from the voluntary program. So these were highly motivated folks that were separating their food scraps. And we found at that time that contamination in our food scrap stream was between 3 and 6% by volume. The one thing that we do allow in our system is compostable can liners because of a number of issues. If we include the compostable can liners, which our composters also view as a contaminant that cause a number of problems, that rate goes up to 11%. The current contamination rate is likely to be quite a bit higher because of the implementation of the requirement. More businesses are recovering food scraps, and folks that weren't voluntarily participating, but now have to because of the requirement, are also increasing the contamination. So to maximize, the climate benefits, enable composters to create clean, valuable plastic-free material, we have found that we need to address the current conditions with the contamination in our food scraps. It really, for us, is critical to keep plastic out of the food scraps recovery system, because mixing, as you know, food scraps, they get sorted out at the composters and get sent to the landfill. And then if plastics do make it through, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir, we know that they cause problems for soil and groundwater. And some non-food products marketed as compostable might be able to fully break down under certain conditions, but these conditions vary based on the product and composting conditions. When the state's going to be doing a study kind of to also look at the beneficial ingredients, like what it adds to compost. As I said, in our system, we also allow the BPI certified can liners that have been accepted, but they cause problems not only getting them out, but they hide contaminants. So when a bag comes in, it can be full of contaminants and it gets mixed in and can cause problems. And our composters have reported that effective removal of contamination at the composting facility, including those BPI bags, is costly. It's difficult and costly. One compost facility reported that removal and disposal accounts for 10 to 25% of operating costs. And as much as 25% of the incoming material that we've collected and sent is being sent to the landfill. So to address these issues, Metro is exploring deep packaging systems that remove contaminants from loads to produce cleaner feedstocks.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, Carolyn.
Sorry, didn't realize I was on mute. I was just nodding my head along vigorously as Holly and Bob were talking. But I'd say the greatest opportunities often mirror the greatest challenges, right? So I'll just name a handful. High capital costs, which is something that's been touched upon. Building large-scale composting facilities requires significant upfront investment with long payback periods, usually. So to provide some numbers for folks on the call, setting up a greenfield commercial scale food waste composting facility can cost anywhere from $1 million to $20 million upfront. And that encompasses technology, infrastructure development, and the permitting process as a whole. So I just share that to say that those upfront costs coupled with the longer payback periods can discourage traditional lenders and investors who are accustomed to those quicker returns. I'd say another challenge is just unpredictable compost end markets. And what I mean by that is fluctuations in compost prices, the fact that in many areas across the United States, compost prices have not risen to reflect the rising costs of inflation. And just a general kind of limited awareness of the environmental benefits of compost can make it really difficult for composters to maintain a stable end market for their product. And the last thing that I have to echo is contamination. Bob and Holly said it well. We know that contamination is a chief concern for composters, especially due to those pesky lookalike products. Contamination disrupts operations, it poses environmental challenges, and it also threatens composters' business viability. We ran a contamination study actually at 10 composting facilities across the US last year, and we found that 85% of the contamination that composters receive is conventional plastic by volume. We also learned that about 21% of composter operating costs are spent addressing contamination on average, which just is not sustainable or acceptable, quite frankly. So findings from that study are available on our website, by the way, if anyone wants to learn more. But the point being is really that there's this increasing opportunity for the investment community to finance tech solutions and other preventative measures upstream at the point of disposal or along collection routes before it reaches the composter. Doing so will help to ensure composters are able to create a clean, high-quality product, which is really the most important thing at the end of the day.
That's great. And Carolyn, if you want to put your website in the chat, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
Just so people can find that easily. That's great. Thank you so much. All right, Nick.
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet because it's really going to be try not to beat a dead horse here, but to echo what everyone has talked about so far, cost and contamination, biggest challenges that we see on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. We know cost is always an issue in any business. The composting sites, within the last 4 years, I'm seeing operating expenses as well as capital costs increase in areas of as high as 50% higher than we've seen in, let's say, pre-COVID. It's kind of weird that that's a timeline that we use now, but pre-COVID, we're seeing costs be 50% higher. One of the things, I don't know if someone's touched on it, but one of the things that we also need to take into account when we talk about costs of these facilities to operate them is not just the cost for composters to invest in developing infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure and making this compost, but those costs are going to be paid for from somewhere, and that's generally going to be people participating in these programs. So composting sites are then forced to increase their tip rates at the gate, which is increasing rates for individuals to participate in these food waste programs. And if there's programs that are not mandatory, people might opt to not participate because of the cost of them. So there's that side of the cost piece as well that we're seeing be a challenge. Every year we generally look at some kind of a rate increase, and there's always a level of pushback from all people that receive that rate increase, and they understand, but they don't like it. But that's also getting all the way down to the individual participants in these programs, and it's affecting them, their day-to-day lives as well. That's something that we really need to take into account for that. Contamination, I'll touch on it quickly. It's an ever-growing challenge that we're seeing at all the facilities. For our purposes, it doesn't matter if it's compostable or not. To us, if it doesn't grow, it doesn't go. That's kind of what we're looking at. There's been talks about developing a new definition for what compostable could mean, and that might develop some better products that could be accepted at composting sites. Recology facilities here in Oregon, we're producing compost in about a 60-day cycle. We're seeing it's taking about 120 days for compostable plastics, whether they be forks, clamshells, to just start to break down, to start bending or start breaking in half. It's taking up to 120 days for the film plastics, the compostables, to go away or unfortunately get small enough that they find their way into the finished product too. So it's taking 2 life cycles for this product to finally break down and get out of it, creating cost for us as well. So it's definitely a challenge for us on that. The other part of it is, in the eyes of our permits on contamination, if it's not organic material, and basically how our permits are written is our facilities need to remain virtually litter free. So when you show up to a facility and you have, whether it be compostable or not, plastic that's in your product, or during the summer months when things are drier and the wind picks up blowing around the facility, that puts you at risk to lose entitlements, put you in a place to potentially receive a violation. So it's a challenge that we deal with on a day-to-day basis from so many different fronts. And until it's addressed, we'll continue to deal with it. So I'll cut it off there because I'm sure others will probably echo the same thing that we've all talked about so far. So
Well, and so important for folks to understand all of the different cost pressures that exist for people operating composting facilities. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Susan.
Yeah, I would just briefly add, and I saw Clinton was on here, that what are some of the gaps? I think there is a real desire to try and push some of the source separation at the MRF level to clean up materials that are coming in. The other thing I would say is, when you talk about the amount of film plastic coming into composters, to really examine plastics around food and grocery retail. Because when you think about it, if most of your volume is your curbside residential yard waste, food waste, a lot of that plastic contamination is coming from areas that don't have compostables, that have like the produce bags that are plastic and things like that. So I would love to see investment in upstream programs that study and look at what's the source of film plastics, and all these foods that have plastics now that didn't 30 years ago, the small containers and all that, and the plastics now on English cucumbers, that's 1,000 times more plastic than we had in 2009, because that's what's happened to our food for convenience purposes. So I would love to see more investment in looking at that. So maybe we could strategize around ways to clean up the piles over there versus looking at issues over here. And that's what I would add to the conversation.
That's great. Orion.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Susan. I think oftentimes one challenge I wanted to add to the conversation is PFAS and that whole range of chemicals. And I think it's a similar situation where we could very easily see regulations get passed down to the composter when, in my opinion, they should very much so be on the manufacturer. And these are things that we can address upstream instead of having to deal with them downstream. So yeah, one big challenge I see is PFAS. That's going to be coming down the pipeline soon here. And in kind of the short term, a lot of that is coming from biosolids at this point, because we all have it in our body. And then also in cardboard. So if you're accepting cardboard, that's usually a pretty big source of PFAS. And, you know, the reality is that should just be something that's not being manufactured, especially in food products. Some other issues that have been touched on quite a bit are cost, contamination, but I want to talk a little bit more about permitting and how variable it is state to state. And this doesn't necessarily create challenges from building the infrastructure, but one challenge that it does create is that people can get permits for facilities that probably shouldn't be permitted. For instance, in some states, you can't permit a compost facility that's doing food waste or biosolids really without air. And then in other states, we're seeing permits for those facilities without contact water collection on online surfaces, things like that. And that's just going to create downstream issues. You know, those facilities might be able to run right now, but 5 years from now, they're going to get shut down for odor or groundwater contamination, issues like that. So the level of flexibility state by state is also a challenge that I'd like to highlight.
That's great. Thank you. And last but not least, Brett.
Yeah, when I look at challenges, I think that patience is probably the one that comes to mind as the most important. You have to be patient. You have to be patient on my end. The customer needs to be patient. The developer needs to be patient. I have facilities that are 7 years in permitting. We just contracted last month with a municipality that's building a sizable system, but we started with that in 2014. And we have a saying internally, when I get excited about a project, my folks internally go, Brett, call me in 4 years, because that's kind of the timeline to get these projects developed. We have done, we did one last year in 6 months permitting to execution and up and running, but that is very rare. We figured out how to navigate the air and water boards and the regulatory bodies because of our experience in California. But really where the challenge comes in now is siting facilities. I don't know how many times I've flown out in the last few years to look at a facility site, and it's just not gonna work. And it's neighbors, it's on a hill, it doesn't have power, it doesn't have water, it's always something. So it's hard to find the ideal site. And that has become a bigger challenge, I think, than the regulatory piece of it. And these folks all need help with money. You got to be able to develop an end market prior to building a facility. The only way to develop end markets prior to building a facility is to have some financial resources to get things up and running, so you have the time to work on that back end. And so I think that that we still need the grant money and the financial support at the state and local level. Thank you.
No, that's great and so important to know. All right, as we wind down, we've got one last question.
All right, it's my turn, and we are actually turning this last question, attention panelists, into a lightning round, 1 minute lightning round. It gets more challenging every time. And it's still the same question, but if you could try to narrow it down, what piece of advice would you offer to one other stakeholder that you choose to talk about in the system to take into consideration to build infrastructure? And we will start off with Bob. 1 minute, please.
All right, really quickly. One thing, at least for Oregon's Recycling Modernization Act, which was passed in 2021, was intended to restore the public's confidence in the recycling system. So if the public sends a compostable product to a composter, they expect it to be composted. So what we're asking is that manufacturers participate in our system in order to make sure that their product is compostable. And the other thing is a consideration, focus the discussion about the environmental effects of compostable products across their full life cycle rather than simply downstream. DEQ's literature review found that the source of feedstock and impacts of producing the feedstock and converting it to packaging food serviceware is more significant determinant of environmental outcome than composting. Upstream considerations matter more than downstream ones, and yet most of the discussion is focused downstream. For those of us that are mandated to prioritize environmental protection, this conversation is upside down with virtually no discussion on what really matters and all the conversation on topics that are significant to producers and composters, but frankly, of less impact to the environment.
Super. Holly, what would you like one of the stakeholders to take into consideration?
Think system-wide when you're planning programs to really integrate collection, transfer, processing, and end markets. And everybody's been saying that. And really keep the processors and end markets in mind, understanding what they can cost effectively process and successfully market, to get into some of the cost conversations, can lead to system stability and sustainability, which is what we're all after.
Super answer. We should advise everyone to watch this whole series so they know the whole system. Okay. Caroline.
Yeah, I'd say building off of Holly's point, this is a systems challenge that requires buy-in and engagement from all stakeholders across the value chain. Everyone has a role to play, whether that's brands and packaging manufacturers, industry groups, composters, regulatory agencies, policymakers, even investors. Everyone has to kind of be at the table. And, I think speaking on behalf of the consortium, we really believe that new composting infrastructure that aligns with the principles of the circular economy hinges upon scaling the recovery of those food scraps, and potentially that food contact compostable packaging as well. But we're continuing to work with the industry, and policymakers, brands, manufacturers, composters to sort of lower those barriers to scaling food waste infrastructure or composting infrastructure that we've talked about today, and excited to continue those conversations at Future Search in September and beyond. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation offline, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Caroline. Nick, from the pile, what would you want to say to another stakeholder?
I would say the biggest thing, collaboration. I've already talked about it. The collaboration, working together with composters and others that are affected within the industry itself, to address the challenges that we've already talked about, whether it be cost or contamination. Grant programs are going to be huge for us, but making sure we're all on the same page, collaborating and talking together, whether that be regulations, how it might affect facilities from a operational standpoint, from a cost standpoint. Having everyone on the same page is always going to prove to be more beneficial in the long run.
Great. Cooperation. Susan.
Yeah, I would just add that my final comment on the stakeholder appreciation of the whole thing that we're working on here is that, in most cases, successful composting programs are either public-private partnerships or city programs run by private companies. And that, to Holly's point, we need to make sure they're sustainable businesses for the future. So partnerships in business, I've always been the one banging that drum. Instead of working in silos, how do we work together to improve everyone's business and the system? And I do think, again, that's why I'm very excited about this series and Future Search, because that's really the intention here. So thank you.
Great. So, hey, Orion, what about you?
Yeah, so I would say I would emphasize the collaboration component of the whole piece, especially when you're coming to permitting. Just make sure you're bringing everybody on board. It's not something that you need to sometimes I feel like there's almost a little bit of shame about building a compost facility. It's like, don't look at it. That's okay. You should bring people in and have those conversations with the community and be transparent. And that's often, in our experience, the best way to build and permit a facility. And then also, when you are thinking about building composting infrastructure, make sure you're building infrastructure that's going to last and is going to work 10 years down the future. You don't want to invest in something and then because of regulatory changes or changing feedstocks, so maybe they add food waste to the green waste bins, you can no longer accept that waste stream. So make sure you're thinking about how you're going to continue composting 10, 20, 30 years down the line as things change.
Thanks, Orion. We need those facilities you're talking about to go get certified operators. Brett, how do you want to wrap us up for the stakeholders?
Build it and they will come. Everybody's a little nervous about getting started and getting into the business, but I've seen almost every one of our North American facilities scale in the last few years. And I don't care where the location is in this country, if you put a composting facility there today, there are enough entrepreneurs, children, people that are concerned about the environment to fill that facility. So I think you just keep that in mind as we move forward, that the opportunity is everywhere. Thank you.
Nice, positive note. I turn it back to you, Candy.
Yeah, this is so great. And Linda, so grateful for you for co-hosting with me today. So grateful for all of our panelists. Wanted to make sure that we had a chance for everybody to speak to each of the different questions. As we close, just wanted to point out that our next session is on June 13th and that we'll be focusing on material designers and material suppliers. So really getting into understanding kind of what goes into creating the materials that allow packaging to be compostable. And so that's going to be the focus of the next session. But as we close, just wanted to share that this is a series. There's 12 in the series. Any and all are welcome to join. We've got an RSVP link. You can sign up for the whole series. And we've made it as easy as possible to give opportunities to highlight just all the different realities for the different stakeholders that are in this system. The system is an ecosystem, and no matter where you sit and no matter who is adjacent to you, there are many, many others that are interconnected. And so what you've heard a lot today is about the importance of communication and collaboration. And really that is the beating heart of this project, is really trying to figure out how to improve collaboration and communication so that everything that supports composting is doing exactly what everybody's investments and time and energy can manifest into seeing the full circularity. And so just wanted to share my deep appreciation for the panelists. There's a couple minutes, so I don't know if anybody has any last thoughts from our panel to send us off. And I know we had to cut you short a little bit. Yep, exactly. Time's up for us. Just again, we share this whole series publicly. And so this video, just like every other video in the series, is available on our YouTube channel. Feel free to visit. If you know somebody who wished they could have been here today, feel free to share that information with them. And then if you have any questions about this project, if you have any interest in getting more involved, we've got an email that you can use that myself and my co-facilitator Ariel and I monitor. And so we would love to hear from you. In the RSVP for the series for the discovery workshops, you can also raise your hand and say, I see what's coming up and I would like to be a panelist. So there's a way to do that too. So feel free to share the information about this series and about this project with anyone and everyone who you think should and would like to know, and just sharing deep appreciation for all of you and for this process. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Candy, for great facilitation today.
Yeah.
And